During the early part of the 20th century, these impressive offices were major hubs of Great Britain's mighty maritime industry. All the country's seaports bustled with commerce and excitement. Here in Liverpool, many of the world's most important shipping companies ran giant operations. The whole of the city's infrastructure and transport system was state-of-the-art and designed to meet the enormous demands of servicing a thriving and very busy international port. The shipping companies built vast warehouses on the quaysides where their famous liners filled every berth, while others waited to come alongside. And there was every kind of passenger, the rich and famous, business people, tourists and hundreds of thousands of immigrants who came to Liverpool from all over Europe to anxiously board a ship that would take them to a new life in America. There was a myriad of great Atlantic liners vying for this vital trade and for the supremacy of what was the most lucrative of all shipping routes. Among them were the truly great superliners of the day. For example, sailing from New York in 1911, the Mauretania, Cunard's blue ribbon holder. Today, popular national pride and achievement are measured by successes in events such as World Cup football. In those days, the great rivalry was over which country could build the biggest and fastest ocean-going liners. Here's Mauretania's legendary sister, the Lusitania, also sailing from New York for Liverpool. In 1911, the Great White Star Line rivaled those two great Cunardas by introducing the Olympic on the Atlantic service. Then in 1912, her slightly larger sister, the Titanic, set off from Southampton on her ill-fated maiden voyage under the command of Captain E.J. Smith. Although Britain was very much a front-runner at this time, she wasn't to have it all her own way. Also in 1912, Germany launched their mighty heavyweight, the Imperator. She was fast and imposing and designed to win the mastery of the North Atlantic. Later to become known as the Berengaria, she was to remain one of the world's two largest ships for over 20 years. In 1914, Germany introduced the Vaterland as sister to the Imperator. In the same year, Cunard brought the Aquitania into service as a running mate for the Mauretania and Lusitania. Later in 1927, the French presented their rival for the North Atlantic, the magnificently decorated Ile-de-France. And 10 years after the First World War, the Germans re-entered the competition with a vengeance with two new superliners, the Bremen and the Europa. Launched on consecutive days in 1929 by the Kaiser, the Bremen and her slightly smaller sister, the Europa, stunned the world with their design and speed. They looked way ahead of any competitors and soon proved it. The Bremen immediately took the prized blue ribbon from Cunard's Mauretania. An almost disastrous fire during final fitting out nearly destroyed the Europa, but when she eventually entered service in 1930, she quickly confirmed German domination of the North Atlantic by stealing the blue ribbon from her own sister, the Bremen. For a while, Germany truly ruled those Atlantic waves. However, sea travel in those days faced certain serious dangers, the greatest of which was fire. In 1933, France's L'Atlantique burnt out in the English Channel after only 3 years in service. But the French already had a revolutionary new contender ready and waiting to conquer the Atlantic, the magnificent and massive Normandy. Launched in October 1932, the Normandy was the first of the 1,000-footers to go into service. She was revolutionary in every sense and able to reach speeds of over 32 knots. Soon she wrested the blue ribbon from the current holder, the Italian liner Rex. British pride was at a very low ebb, having been successively upstaged by her traditional rivals, the Germans, Italians and the French. But on a very wet and overcast day on the banks of the Clyde in 1934, something very special was about to happen.
I am happy to name this ship the Queen Mary. I wish success to her and to all who sail in her.
For all the people of Great Britain, indeed for the whole of the then British Empire, there'd never been a more crucially important launching of a ship. After years of industrial depression and financial hardships, and with very little in prospect to boost seriously flagging morale, British prestige badly needed a boost. And here it came, in the shape of a new world-beating superliner, the biggest ever built, the 80,773 gross-ton Queen Mary. Even as she was moving regally down the slipway, thousands of people clamoured to book for her maiden voyage. One of the lucky ones was Charles Chislett from Rotherham. It was 2 years later, in May 1936, that the excited Charles Chislett drew back the curtains of his hotel bedroom and saw the Queen Mary for the very first time. He wrote, "She towered over the warehouses of Dockland, gleaming in the arc light, red, white and black, rather ghostly and apparently deserted." It made him think of those days when squires, before they took on the responsibilities of knighthood, would spend the previous night in solitary contemplation. And so it seemed that before she began her life of service on the high seas, this great ship was brooding on the great responsibilities which were to be hers. Inside the Queen Mary there was an eerie silence. Her lights were dimmed in readiness for the curtains to rise on her first regally magnificent performance. The world was eagerly waiting to judge her as she made her debut in what was to be the greatest maritime spectacle ever staged. Though most of her crew rested, some key members worked through the night to ensure that everything would be faultless on her most important day. Like the Queen Mary's crew, Charles Chislett had found it difficult to sleep that night. By 8 o'clock on the morning of Wednesday, the 27th of May, 1936, he was down on the Southampton quayside with his 16mm cine camera to record this most historic day in British maritime history. Charles wasn't the only one who was up early. Passengers and sightseers were already arriving from all over the country. What a magnificent spectacle greeted them. Here was Britain's massive response to any global maritime challenge, and they were to be part of the most memorable of maiden voyages. With the images that Charles Chislett captured and his own account of what happened, we can recreate that day in May 1936 just as he experienced it. As you approach the Queen Mary, you feel a great sense of awe and humility. You wonder at how Britain has regained this maritime mastery of design and construction. There's been a huge demand to be part of this sailing. Cunard White Star has received over 20,000 applications from all over the world for the 2,000 berths. In the port of Southampton, other famous liners, such as the Union Castle Line's Winchester Castle, are part of an all-star cast ready to play their roles in this spectacular performance. But the star of the show dominates the stage. Southampton belongs to the Queen Mary. Never has this massive maritime theatre attracted so much attention. The BBC Outside Broadcast team has also arrived early to make preparations for their historic broadcast. Film crews will soon be swarming around, taking the first of many shots to lead up to that final dramatic departure. All the time, smoke is rising lazily from the immense funnels above us. It almost seems that the ship is impatient at all these last-minute preparations and is straining at her moorings, desperate to get underway to show what she can do in the Atlantic. The Star is getting due floral tribute. Hundreds of bunches of flowers are going aboard. There are costly orchids and blooms of all kinds, which will spread their heady perfumes throughout the great vessel. How many days must it have taken to create this fantastic display? Most passengers have the usual expensive suitcases and cabin trunks, but some of the more wealthy and prominent people have even taken their cars with them. They too, just like the Queen Mary herself, have been polished and are gleaming with pride as they are hoisted aboard. With the first boat train now due, the band of the Royal Marines is boosting the spirited feelings of excitement and anticipation. And this event is a wonderful present for the ship's namesake. It's the birthday of Her Royal Highness Queen Mary. As the first of 5 special boat trains approach the quayside, there's a frenzy of excited conversation about the great names who are on the passenger list. Henry Hall, Francis Day, Cora Goffin, and half the blue blood of England. There are some friendly arguments about the blue riband. Are we going to try for it? Some say that Cunard White Star aren't in the record-breaking business. They just want to keep to schedule. Do we really believe that? As well as her 2,000 passengers and 1,200 crew, the Queen Mary also has a staggering 4,000 visitors on board. Thousands more have clambered onto every vantage point for miles around, including every ship of every size in the Solent. Here's the paddle steamer Brighton Queen steaming by. One estimate is that nigh on 1 million people have massed along coast from here to Land's End. Suddenly, there's a belch of smoke from one of the Mary's enormous funnels. That's caused waves of excitement to sweep through the crowds. Sailing time is very close now. The whole of the Solent is jammed with ships. Many have come from ports and seaside towns hundreds of miles away. The paddle steamer Lorna Doone is giving her passengers a close-up view of the Mary they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. And close by is one of the families sharing some of the glory. That's one of the Mary's smaller sisters, the Georgie. Just one gangway left to clear. It's almost the magic moment, 4:30. The stewards are trying to clear the decks of all those sightseers, walking around, banging their gongs and shouting, "All visitors ashore!" There are Southampton's famous tugs, dressed overall and taking up their positions, ready for the final signal to sail. And now we're ready for the sound that everyone's been waiting for so long. The Mary's mighty sirens will announce her sailing at any second. Those attendant tugs have started to carefully manoeuvre the mighty liner away from the massively crowded quayside. And as we can hear, the noise from all around is quite deafening. Those planes are flying around like bees around a honeypot, and one's actually towing a streamer advertising bile beans. Famous artists are hurriedly putting the finishing touches to their sketches of history being made. And as countless families and friends are waving goodbye, that vast armada of ships lined up as a guard of honour in Southampton water and as far as Calshot are having to move gently aside to give her free passage. Look at those news photographers clinging dangerously to the ship's rigging, trying to get the most spectacular shots. Every single ship is now sounding its siren in salute. As she slips graciously past the British India troopship Dilwara, the Queen Mary is now responding to that multitude of screams, whistles and sirens that are blasting out at her. Union Castle's liner Balmoral Castle has now joined in this symphony of sirens. It's a moment that's lifted everybody to their feet. Hats and sticks are being thrown in the air, and there can't be many people anywhere in the country who aren't glued to their radio sets for moment-by-moment description of this greatest of maritime events. There'll no doubt be a lot of very happy emotion and lumps in people's throats right now. Flying boats take full advantage to get a bird's-eye view of this spectacle. At last, the Queen Mary has found the open sea. This may well be her maiden voyage, but those boat drill regulations still have to be complied with. After that, it's plain sailing to the only call en route to America, the French port of Cherbourg. The international financier J.P. Morgan's $2 million yacht has been shadowing us on our way to Cherbourg, but there's no French reception to greet us. However, nothing is going to spoil this great day. Suddenly, the sounds of Rule Britannia have been coming from a small English ship which has crossed the channel to show the flag. The Mary is belching a cloud of very oily smoke, which unfortunately has just happened to billow away on the breeze towards the town, accidentally, of course. Here, and we're not meant to know this, £2.5 million of gold bullion are being taken aboard. And there's a very pleasant surprise. There are some French admirers. They've delivered the very finest champagne to be presented to every passenger aboard as a gift from one of France's finest vineyards. We left Cherbourg in the middle of the night, and now we're fully up to speed, and the sea looks like it's seething and boiling as those quadruple propellers are driving us ahead, passing Bishop's Rock, and then out into the vast Atlantic Ocean. This is where the Mary is going to show her greatest qualities. Each weighing some 35 tons, the 4 propellers, made from turbiston castings, are the largest that have ever been made. They're driven by 4 sets of quadruple expansion reduced geared turbines, each having 257,000 blades, all hand set. Developing 50,000 horsepower, they turn at 3,000 revs per minute. All this power means that the Mary can reach speeds in excess of 30 knots and maintain a service speed of 28.5 knots. Now let's take a look around, starting with the communications centre. It's equipped with the very latest technology. Look at those huge transmitter valves. The Queen Mary has 2 radio stations. This one is on the sun deck, and 5 radio operators are handling a tremendous amount of traffic. On the very first day, they've dealt with 120 calls to South Africa, Australia and Canada. One caller excitedly told anyone who cared to listen that she'd heard her dog barking at home in Australia. On B-deck, here's Miss Turner at work. She's the supervisor of the ship's 700-line telephone switchboard. It's the largest ever installed in a liner. Even the wealthiest of seasoned travellers are eagerly experimenting with the thrill of using the telephone at sea. For the first time, they can telephone just about anyone and anywhere, and they are doing. There's been a lot of calling the purser's office or picking up the white telephone in their cabins and phoning their fellow passengers. The Queen Mary's captain, Sir Edgar Britton, has had to impress upon Miss Turner not to put any calls through to his cabin unless of great importance. Otherwise, he said, he'd be spending the whole voyage just answering calls from his passengers. The purser's office is a centre of constant activity, both for passengers and for the running of the ship. The chief purser acts as the ship's host. He's been busy entertaining the rich and famous in his cabin, which acts as a social club where the many celebrities can meet. The assistant pursers are responsible for everything from arranging ship's concerts, sports meetings and tournaments to the more exacting job of satisfying all sorts of passenger demands, some of which are proving to be pretty bizarre to say the least. The purser and his team are responsible for the passengers' 350 mini-safes, as well as compiling the ship's manifest. This is a complete record of every passenger and member of the crew, all of whom, when they came aboard, had to fill in a form of full personal particulars. And this has involved a huge amount of typing up and many late nights to complete all those manifests ready for the port authorities in New York. The ship's bank is a branch of one of the big high street banks and can handle every kind of financial transaction. You certainly don't feel claustrophobic aboard. The Mary has 38 public rooms. This is the main lounge on the promenade deck. It's 96 foot long and 70 feet wide. As with all the interior design, it's decorated with the most magnificent marquetry. There's a fully equipped stage and parquet dance floor. The mirrors add greater depth, and over 50 types of wood were used for the exquisite veneering. Some of these have never been used before. It's early in the morning, and few passengers are about. The shopping centre has only just opened. This is the Burlington Arcade of the ship, with many famous West End names. Mrs. Beggs has put the final touches to her window display, and is ready and waiting with, among other things, Spanish dolls at 10 guineas each. There are 22 lifts aboard, connecting with the other decks. For those who are concerned about keeping fit, they can always exercise up and down the 6 magnificent staircases from sea deck to the gymnasium on the sun deck. In place of honour on the grand staircase is a plaque commemorating the ship's launching. It's been the first time in history that a ship has been graced with the name of a living queen. There are 2 indoor swimming pools aboard under the care of Miss Dand, 6'3" and still beautifully tanned from her previous voyage on a winter cruise. This is the cabin class pool. The Mary's shown an early tendency to roll, so diving in the pool can be a risky business, especially if the diver has one eye on Miss Dand at the same time. In really rough weather, both the swimming pool and therefore Miss Dand are strictly out of bounds. Those who are determined to end the voyage fitter than when they started it can take advantage of the regulation-sized squash courts. These have been in constant use. If you just want to walk, the Mary's alleyways or companionways give you that great feeling of generous space. The more expensive cabins really are the last word in luxury and comfort, lined and panelled in woods of exotic species from forests all over the world. If all this expense has been making you ladies hot and bothered, you can cool off by turning up the latest in compact ventilators, and then use the white telephone to make that important appointment for a manicure at the beauty parlour under the charge of Miss Graham. For the men, there's a hairdresser's to rival any in the world. This is run by Michael Arnold, who, together with his fellow barbers, offers a complete West End service, including tips for the winner of the Derby and what the ship's noon-to-noon mileage will be. The largest room ever built in any ship is the Mary's cabin-class restaurant on sea deck. It's 160 feet long, 30 feet high, and the entire breadth of the ship. 800 passengers can be seated here in complete comfort, leaving ample room for the waiters and staff to provide a service that's second to none. The galleys prepare 10,000 meals a day from vast stores that include 70 tons of meat, 20 tons of fish, 20,000 pounds of poultry, 100,000 pounds of vegetables, and 70,000 eggs. On the menu it says you can have anything you want. One of the guests at the captain's table is a lowly Cockney lady turned millionairess. One day she said to the waiter, "Here, Mike, I'd like fish and chips wrapped up in the news of the world." Undaunted, Mike scoured the crew's quarters for the newspaper and returned with great aplomb to present the delighted gourmet with her fish and chips wrapped in the newspaper, together with a large bottle of Sarson's vinegar. After dinner, there's dancing in the main lounge, and on this maiden voyage, the BBC is doing live broadcast featuring one of the nation's biggest radio personalities, Henry Hall, and his orchestra.
That concludes the program of dance music played to you by the BBC Dance Orchestra, directed by Henry Hall. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, and here's to the next time.
On board we have a rich variety of passengers, from famous celebrities and prominent people to just very ordinary travellers with the good fortune to have a ticket for this, the most important of maiden voyages. There's been a lot of promenading with people hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the Mary's many celebrated VIPs. The first daily tote on the ship's noon-to-noon run has been won by Mrs. Pillman, who collected the tidy sum of £833, enough to buy her a couple of decent motor cars. In the cabin class section of the ship, passengers are preparing another little flutter, this time on the traditional shipboard sport of horse racing. The decks are alive with all manner of activities. Down in the tourist class, there are boxing matches for eager young contenders, with more punters trying to win $1 or two. The Mary's bridge reflects her size and is equipped with the very latest technical and navigational aids. It's here that the Commodore of the line, Captain Sir Edgar Britton, keeps watch over the safety of all aboard and, of course, of the mighty Queen Mary herself. She's been built using over 10 million rivets and sufficient steel plating to build a highway 100 miles long. She has over 2,000 portholes and windows, 12,000 light fittings, 10 miles of carpets, 200,000 pieces of crockery, 100,000 pieces of china and glass, 30,000 sheets, 21,000 tablecloths, and 210,000 towels. She has enough refrigeration plant to meet the needs of 15,000 homes, and her funnels are so large they can accommodate 3 giant steam locomotives the size of the Coronation Scot. Down below decks, the Mary's chief engineer, Llewellyn Roberts, also has tremendous responsibility, maintaining her massive engines and making sure that nothing will interrupt our voyage across the Atlantic at speeds reaching over 30 knots. The Mary also has basic automatic steering equipment, which helps to relieve some of the pressure on the bridge. This is the gear that actually controls the rudder. Also on the bridge are the controls for all the ship's safety doors, showing whether they're open or closed. In an emergency, any of these watertight doors can be shut by remote control from the bridge. This makes it possible to divide the ship into a number of self-contained watertight compartments. Experts claim that the Queen Mary could be cut in two and still continue to float. As the coast of America draws ever closer, the Travel Bureau is busy supplying passengers with all the information they need ashore. There's been no let-up in the sheer volume of cablegram traffic to and from the Mary. So much, in fact, that many messages are still likely to be left undelivered after our arrival in New York. The radio officers are also responsible for picking up the BBC News and relaying it to the public rooms.
BBC World Service presents Radio Newsreel.
There's even a fully equipped laboratory aboard in the charge of a qualified chemist who not only works with the surgeon, Mr. Butler, but also ensures the purity of the ship's water supply. All luxury liners have their own printing press and most publish their own newspaper, but the Queen Mary has a complete printing works with the very latest equipment, enabling it to produce a whole range of printed matter from ship's menus, competition lists, cocktail invitations, and of course the Queen Mary's own newspaper, the Ocean Times. With all those famous people and the daily hubbub of shipboard living, there's plenty of local news to report in addition to what comes in from around the world. Today is Saturday the 30th of May, and the headline for the Ocean Times is that the Mary has covered 766 miles. That's a record-breaking day's run on the westward Atlantic voyage. But though the capture of the Blue Ribbon does now seem possible, it's by no means certain, because we're now approaching the Grand Banks, where the cold current borders on the warm Gulf Stream. The climate will soon change, and the Mary will sail into thick, cold fog. People are making the most of what's left of the decent weather. It won't be long before the deck's empty and the Mary's mighty fog siren is booming out every few minutes. Tonight is going to be one that Charles Chislett will never forget. He's been invited to a private showing in the Miniature Theatre of a film of the launching of the Queen Mary. As the audience relives that great experience, sitting in the very heart of the focus of that film, they'll hear the deep, warning boom of her voice above as the ship ploughs on at a more cautious speed. Unbeknown to the passengers, when they come to the area where the Titanic had sunk, a wreath will be dropped overboard quietly and without ceremony into the deep, cold waters of the North Atlantic. The general feeling now amongst the passengers is that the change in the weather will put paid to any attempt to capture the Blue Ribbon on this voyage. But life aboard goes on as one endless party, everything of course in the best possible taste. And now, early in the morning on our 4th day at sea, comes the first sign of the big New York welcome that we're going to get. While we're still 100 miles from land, an American newsreel plane is swooping low over us. Flying with us against the wind, he overhauls very slowly, and there's a sudden surge of excitement aboard as the Mary's passengers line the decks, waving to the film operator, who's clearly visible, winding away at his camera for dear life. Then, banking around our bows, the plane roars down the other side at 200 miles an hour before turning into the wind to creep past us again. The Mary's speed has increased to 32 knots, making a magnificent picture as she ploughs through the silver seas. We've been hearing various rumours about our rapid progress and the possibilities of breaking the record. We just don't know if she really has been trying for the blue ribbon. Finally, it's emerged that after being on half speed for 11 hours due to the fog, she has missed it by just 42 minutes. But then she's never been flat out and only touched 34 knots for a short period. As we steam closer and closer to New York, the skies above are crowded with planes of every shape and size, all eager to take their first close look at the magnificent RMS Queen Mary. The crew are hoisting the red ensign to the top of the mast for all to see. It isn't just the British who are jubilantly celebrating. A Swiss passenger has dressed up in full national costume to add an extra splash of colour to the occasion. No ship has ever received such a massive welcome as this ever before, and according to the stories spreading throughout the ship, this is only just the start of the welcome New York and America have in store. As she slows for the American pilot boat, the order's being given to hoist the signal flags to dress her overall. The closer we get to New York, so the number of aircraft and armada of welcoming ships is growing incredibly. They're all crammed with excited spectators, sounding their whistles and their sirens. Even at reduced speed, the mighty Queen Mary's wake is still powerful enough to give a rough ride to that passing American coaster. Now we're dropping anchor between New Jersey and Long Island to allow port officials to board. Long queues are forming in the lounges for the examination of passports. Newsreel cameramen seem to have appeared from thin air, all desperate to get an all-important interview with the Commodore of the line, Captain Sir Edgar Britton.
Our speed came up above our expectations, and everybody was very pleased with what the ship did. Are you going to try for the blue ribbon, Captain? Well, naturally, that's what we're out for.
So now we know, it's official. On a future voyage, he really means to do it. Having kept that massive welcome party waiting in anticipation, the Queen Mary's in the safe hands of her river pilot Gustav Svensson and ready to make her grand entrance onto the most important maritime stage in the world. We're edging our way slowly towards Manhattan Island through the throng of twisting, turning, tooting craft that form the most triumphal reception that any great liner has ever known. It's almost as if every American has decided that from today, the RMS Queen Mary quite simply belongs to them. Thanks to Charles Chislett for letting us join this historic party. On board, everyone is in the highest of spirits and dressed to suit the occasion of the arrival of a true queen. As we make the final approach to New York, there's a blaring musical welcome from America's top bands. And while each one is playing its welcome over the many radio stations, Henry Hall's orchestra, joined by Larry Adler, are responding by playing their famous signature tune. Meanwhile, behind this famous Manhattan skyline, we're told that Broadway is giving one of those crazy ticker-tape displays as a blizzard of paper swirls out from all the skyscrapers down into the streets below. The lenses of thousands of movie cameras are pointing through the heat wave haze from all angles, above, below, and all sides, to record this scene which rivals any Hollywood blockbuster. As the river narrows, manoeuvring is becoming more and more difficult. Coast Guard cutters have circled the Mary in an attempt to give her protected passage through the seething mass of welcoming ships. Just now, God Save the King was played from one pleasure steamer by 15 girls dressed in white trousers and black hussar hats. It's as if the whole world has suddenly gone crazy. Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter would have felt quite at home here. This reception really is almost beyond belief. Now the United States Line's Leviathan, formerly the Vaterland, is adding her voice to the chorus. For some of the Mary's star celebrities, there's just about time for one more glass of the finest of champagnes before facing the hordes of reporters waiting on the quayside. And now comes the magical moment that the whole of America has been waiting for. The Queen Mary's sirens are silencing the busy New York waterfront for miles around. The excitement is quite simply relentless, and we're all preparing now to go ashore. It's precisely 4 p.m, and exactly on time, the powerful Moran tugs are nudging the Mary gently into her pier. It's hot. New York's sweltering in an early heat wave with temperatures in the high 80s. It's been a good excuse for thousands of office workers to get off early to be here to see this spectacular arrival of the Queen Mary. Even the rather sedate New York Times has entered into the spirit of the occasion, describing her entrance into New York Harbor as sailing through an herbaceous border of humanity. The New Jersey Gazette proclaims, "Broadway has found a new star tonight." New York, indeed all of America, have opened their hearts to the Queen Mary and to passengers and crew. It's made little difference who you are, Commodore, purser, chef, deckhand, or even bellboy. Everyone is getting the full celebrity treatment in the streets of New York and the bars and clubs of Broadway. Just the slightest hint of our English accent is being greeted by a, "Hey, Limey, let me buy you a drink." Everyone from the ship is being feted and wined and dined, and Broadway's bars are full of gossip about what's been happening on board the Queen Mary since we docked. There have been great celebration dinners. 1,400 people have visited the liner this evening alone, wandering all over from top to bottom. And to meet the visitors' thirst, 9 extra bars have had to be installed on the promenade deck. After the frenzy of yesterday, this morning the ship opened to the public. Special sightseeing buses came from all over New York. It's reckoned that 6,000 people a day will pay $1 each to visit her. All this money is going to the Missions to Seamen and other related charities. As for the sightseers, it seemed that they really wanted their dollars worth and took everything they could lay their hands on as souvenirs. Cutlery, plates, cups, ashtrays, glasses and salt cellars. Even potted plants and brass nameplates have all disappeared in vast quantities. A greedy New York lady was politely prevented from marching down the gangway with one of the Mary's very expensive paintings under her arm. For us ashore here on Broadway, our souvenirs are going to be memories of the Ziegfeld Follies and as many other attractions as we can get to see. Meanwhile, work's been going on refuelling and restoring the ship. It's Friday afternoon, and at precisely 3:30 we cast off to start our triumphant voyage home to Southampton. As we sail back down the Hudson River, past where the great German liner Europa is berthed, the Queen Mary is a very happy ship, and we're sure she'll remain so to the end of her seagoing days. She and her crew have already made thousands of new friends. The captain's taking with him over 30,000 fan mail letters that have come in from all over America. The Queen Mary has won more hearts and followers in a single voyage than other ships will do in a lifetime. She has become everyone's friend. Even on the homeward voyage, the greetings are still flooding in. This one's coming from the Hamburg American liner New York. Cunard White Star's decision to make Southampton the Queen Mary's home has had a tremendous impact on the port. At first it seemed that this wasn't going to happen. The port owners, the Southern Railway Company, under the chairmanship of Sir Herbert Walker, weren't willing to spend nearly £2 million on a dry dock that was big enough to accommodate the ship. In the end, Cunard White Star gave an ultimatum: no dock, no ship. They threatened either to move all their operations back to Liverpool or even build their own port on the south coast of England. That blackmail has worked, and the 1,200-foot-long King George V dry dock will be built. Southampton is destined to become the busiest passenger liner port in the world, with Queen Mary standing proud over them all. And as the years go by, the sight of her magnificent funnels towering over the warehouses and buildings continues to thrill people in their thousands. They crowd to the windows of every train passing through Southampton in the hope of getting just a glimpse of the great liners berthed for as far as the eye can see. But primarily they want to catch sight of the world's most famous liner, the superstar of the maritime stage, the RMS Queen Mary. Despite her instant world acclaim, people everywhere still long for her to do one more thing: to capture that prized blue ribbon from a lesser rival, the French liner, the Normandy. And so, on a warm August afternoon in 1936, the Mary once again set sail for New York. With the help of some more very rare archive film, we can again step back in time and see for ourselves just what it must have been like to have been aboard the Queen Mary on this historical blue-ribboned winning voyage. As she steams majestically down the Solent, conditions seem ideal for a fast crossing. Although her owners have previously expressed their tongue-in-cheek disinterest in breaking the record, word has swept the nation that she really will go for it, and every family in the land is hoping and praying that she'll do so. Crossing the English Channel to Cherbourg, her engines are performing well and the weather forecast for the Atlantic is good. In Cherbourg she picks up passengers from all parts of Europe and Western Asia. They've travelled by road, rail or air to the French port to join the great liner. Rumours are still rife among the passengers and crew that she really is going for the record this time, while Cunard White Star continue to promote the idea that such records are of no real interest to them. If the French are actually thinking for one moment that the Mary might be considering having a go at taking the record from their beloved Normandy, they might just try to create the odd little mishap here and there, which might somehow slow our progress. But so far, so good. In the crow's nest, 210 feet above the ship's waterline, the lookouts have an uninterrupted view across the great expanse of ocean. From here you can get some idea of just what it's like to be a lookout, but not what it's like in a North Atlantic winter and heavy rolling seas. Right on time, the Mary sounds her sirens. Unceremoniously slips out of the harbour to start what appears to be just another routine Atlantic voyage. On her previous voyage, she'd arrived late in Southampton due to fog. But now, as we steam past Bishop's Rock, the official blue ribbon starting line for the westward crossing, everything looks almost perfect for a very fast time. As she turns her bows towards the Atlantic Ocean and America, the order is given for full steam ahead, and the giant ship now rises to the momentous challenge. So much is going to depend on the Mary's chief engineer, Yorkshireman Llewellyn Roberts. He looks confident and calm, but he knows that the eyes of the world are once again focused on the minute-by-minute progress of the Queen Mary. Down below in the main engine room, there's a tremendous battery of machinery, and men like young Bobby Johnson, a junior engineer who's been with the ship since the fitting out at Clydebank, is helping to take care of her 4 great turbines. There are 27 boilers with 160,000 tubes, together with 220 oil fuel burners. These control panels monitor every ounce of power in this enormously complex system. At the heart of the Mary is the greatest floating powerhouse ever built by man. It generates enough electricity to meet the lighting requirements for a city of 150,000 people. "4,000 miles of cabling have been used to connect all the electrical installations. Maintaining all this equipment in perfect working condition is a Herculean task, requiring the expert attention of more than 50 engineers. Every element of this machinery has its own blueprint, noting every plate and every screw, and was planned on paper to the last detail before construction began. To the layman, it seems almost impossible to have built such engines inside a ship. Just to make sure it all worked, each machine, regardless of its size or capacity, was first assembled in workshops, tested, taken to pieces, and then reassembled here inside the hull of this great liner. And down here it's like being inside a giant aircraft hangar. It took hundreds of shoreside technical staff and engineers to design these hugely powerful engines, and now all their work is finally being put to what is arguably the biggest maritime test ever to take the blue ribbon. The pride of our nation rests on the success of this incredible engineering. At her service speed of 28.5 knots, the Mary's engines consume 1,020 tons of oil a day. But at speeds in excess of this, the consumption increases by nearly 50% to around 1,500 tons a day. In terms of fuel burnt per distance, that works out to something like 1 metre to a gallon. On the first day, the run has been 472 miles at an average speed of 29.5 knots. The second day, she's averaged 30.4 knots, and it's clear to all on board that she's doing very well. So long as the weather holds, she stands an excellent chance of a record westward run. The world's watching and waiting for the regular news bulletins on her progress. Schoolboys all over Britain dream of one day standing on her bridge. There's the French liner Ile de France off our starboard bow. We've been wondering how her crew and passengers feel at seeing the Queen Mary racing past them at a speed that their much idolised Normandy simply can't match. However, the French are treating us with decent traditional maritime respect, sounding their blaring foghorn to wish bon voyage, and we immediately respond to those good wishes. Despite having had to reduce speed because of mist and fog, we've reached the official Western End finishing post, the Ambrose Light, in 4 days and 27 minutes at an average speed of 30.14 knots. That's some 3 hours faster than the Normandy's record run. Of course, we've also got a record return run to do to complete the challenge, but New York gives us an ecstatic reception, knowing that the Queen Mary will soon proudly bear that blue ribbon. The Holland American lines, Volendam and Veendam are joining in the celebrations. And then the Mary is booming out in triumph with her own mighty sirens for the whole of New York to hear. But it won't be long before life aboard changes very much for the worse. With the coming of World War II, the Queen Mary, together with her newly launched sister, the Queen Elizabeth, were converted for troop carrying. Those young men were thrilled to sail aboard such famous ships and to clamber to every possible vantage point. During the war, Queen Mary steamed nearly 750,000 miles all over the world, the sisters carrying between them over 2 million people. On one voyage alone, the Queen Mary carried, including her crew, over 16,000. Their wartime service was invaluable, and in his tribute to them later on, Winston Churchill said, "Built for the arts of peace and to link the old world with the new, the Queens have challenged the fury of Hitlerism in the battles of the Atlantic. Their sterling efforts shortened the war by at least a year. The world owes a debt that it will not be easy to measure." After the war, the two queens returned in triumph to New York with thousands of American war heroes and GI brides aboard. The ships always received the massive welcomes they'd now become quite accustomed to. Those returning American servicemen settled back into civilian life to work to make this great country greater in the post-war years. The Cunard White Star liners were restored to their former glory and started to play their own important part in generating the prosperity that helped to make New York one of the world's foremost ports. Once again, these ships towered high above the city's waterfront warehouses. Americans treated the liners as their own. They were so popular that passengers often had to book a berth as much as 6 months in advance. Their arrivals and sailings were very much a part of the rhythm of energy and excitement that New York thrives upon. The Empire State Building was about to be overshadowed by the many new skyscrapers that were shooting up around it. But the two queens would continue to dominate the lucrative North Atlantic passenger trade for almost 2 more decades, earning profits of £250,000 a voyage at the peak of their popularity. And so the mighty Mary reigned supreme. Sailing from Southampton's newly built ocean terminal, she went on to make 1,001 Atlantic crossings, to voyage 3,790,000 miles, and to carry well over 2 million passengers. She played the regal hostess to countless hundreds of the world's most famous people, politicians, sportsmen, billionaires, industrialists, and royalty, including the Queen Mother and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. But it was the movie and music stars of the day who always caught public attention. Gloria Swanson, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Rosemary Squires, Alec Guinness, Noel Coward, Charlton Heston, Joyce Grenfell, Peter Sellers, Liberace, Frank Sinatra, Spencer Tracy, Phil Silvers, Henry Fonda, Betty Davis, Robert Mitchum, Anna Neagle, Katharine Hepburn, Johnny Ray, Deborah Kerr, Bill Haley, Laurence Olivier, John Mills, and many, many more. And these great names often became personal friends of the Mary's crew, and many of the stars wouldn't sail unless they were assured of the attention of their favourite steward or stewardess. Stars such as Liberace would often play for the passengers, but of all the prominent people she carried, none quite equalled her own claim to international fame. The company was later to become known simply as Cunard, and to receive a letter with the name Cunard stamped on it was excitement in itself. But to actually work for them or to sail aboard one of their ships was the true mark of success, be you cabin boy or commodore. Today, over 60 years after her famous maiden voyage, the Queen Mary lives in semi-retirement at her berth in Long Beach, California, where thousands of tourists still flock to see her. She sailed from Southampton for the last time on the 31st of October 1967, and with her went so much of our national identity and pride. There will never be great Atlantic liners quite like her again, and it's doubtful if there will ever be another great liner so universally popular and famous as the infinitely majestic RMS Queen Mary.
They were the big ships, we watched them pass by.